Good to go?
Let's do it.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you've all had a fantastic day, and I hope you're enjoying the Olympics from wherever you're watching it. It's been fantastic. For us, a lot of early starts for me. I've been setting my alarm during the night so I can get up to watch some finals and whatnot. But yeah, I hope you're enjoying it from where you are in the world. And thanks for joining our July DG community chat. I think this is our 4th or 5th one now, so thanks again for all your support. It's really appreciated. Dan and I had a few discussions about what we were going to talk about this month, and we decided, as the world is kind of opening back up again and we're moving from more digital platforms back to physical meeting with people and whatnot, that we thought it'd be a good idea to discuss networking and tips and techniques to use going forward as well. And then there's other points that we're going to discuss about being already in the sports law sector and how to not become complacent, and what we can do for those that are already in the sector to kind of enhance their knowledge and whatnot. But that's the 2 key points that we are going to discuss in this month's call. There's a chat function, I think, at the bottom left-hand side of the stream, wherever you're watching it from whatever platform, whether it's YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn. So please feel free just to put your questions in the left-hand side of the box, and Dan and I will ask the questions and answer them hopefully as best as we can. Feel free to also just introduce yourself as well amongst the platforms as well. And as ever, this has been recorded so we can distribute it amongst our social channels at the end, which should be in the next kind of week or so, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Jodie. So thank you for the intro as always. Yeah, apologies if you're having a little bit of trouble getting onto the stream. I think we've had a little bit of an issue with sending the right link out, but hopefully if you can, you should be able to get onto the main stream from either my YouTube channel, live on Periscope through Twitter, or on LinkedIn. So apologies if I might have given the wrong link out slightly earlier. We've got a few teething problems, but I think hopefully we are still good to go. So yeah, Jodie and I were thinking about the discussion for today. Obviously, as you know, for new people coming in for the first time, the DG community really is just a vehicle for people to be able to come together, to network amongst a particular group, to be able to hear and speak to us, to ask questions on a range of different topics, if it's the sports and entertainment industry, if it's particular areas in relation to career development, if it's stuff to do with self-development ideas as well. So just as Jodie has said, I'm already getting a few questions through, which is great. Please put your questions through the chat, if that's on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or on YouTube, as well as here. And we will absolutely get to as many questions as we can throughout the evening, at least our evening, for the next 50 minutes or so. So one of the things that we were going to touch on, twofold. One was some of the questions we got was around, obviously now that the world, in some parts of the world, is starting to open up again. And we've obviously had an 18-month plus period whereby people have effectively been communicating, meeting, and networking digitally. And now we are starting to open up, so it might be possible to meet people more generally. We thought we would have a bit of a discussion based on some of our experiences more generally on how we've gone about doing things in the past. The insecurities or otherwise of going to conferences, of meeting people, of emailing people, and the responses or lack of responses that people have had. And so, Jodie, just turning it back to you before maybe I make a couple of points. As someone that for a while has wanted to move into the sports industry, that has successfully done that now, and that you were effectively at a time, looking to network, go to conferences, meet people or otherwise. What are some of the things that you experienced, I guess, and what were some of the learnings that you had and took away as a result?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, I probably can divide this question up as pre-COVID and probably during COVID as well, because pre-COVID, you were able to obviously attend in-person events. And at the time, I think it might have been in 2019, I attended the Lawn Sport, which for anyone, if you don't know about it, Lawn Sport is the absolute Bible website of everything to do with sports law, with just a lot of blogs and articles and a lot of things. But yeah, they do a conference once a year, usually in September. It's based in London, an in-person event. And I was encouraged to go along to this. So the first thing I did was I looked out to see the agenda, to see who was attending, and just to be familiar with the kind of topics that were going to be discussed. And at that point, I then kind of researched all the people who were on the agenda, and whether that be just sending a quick LinkedIn message to say, I'm looking forward to your talk in the Law and Sport conference on this particular day and time, just so that you've got an interest in particular areas. So I did that to begin with, but really, when I went to these conferences, I actually didn't know a single person, because I didn't know anybody in the area, in the sector. I didn't know anything about it. So I was actually really nervous, because I didn't know who to speak to. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know what to do. So I remember walking in the door and thinking, oh, what am I? What can I do? And I remember the first thing I did was, when I got into registration, I just went straight over to the coffee table to grab a quick coffee or a tea, because I didn't want to stand in a room on my own and not have anybody to speak to be like, Jodie, no mates, kind of thing. So it was good to go over and get a quick coffee and whatnot. And then I went into the conference and sat down and listen to the various speakers, and you get breaks throughout the day of these events. So in that time, actually, it's a really useful tool to be able to go and network with people that you recognise from LinkedIn, or even people that you don't recognise. People are often standing in big groups, so just feel free to always go over, introduce yourself, whether you're a student, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a graduate, and just have some icebreaker questions. Is kind of what I found. And then sometimes people will hand you their card, and sometimes people just have general conversations. But it is really daunting to be able to do it, especially when you've not been to events before. But I would say, don't let the anxiety and stress of going to these events put you off, because actually you can get out of it so much more, even if you don't necessarily speak to people, and don't put any pressure on yourself that you've got to speak to 10 or 20 or 30 people. But actually, in the sports law setting, if you go to more than one conference, you'll often see the same people, because it is quite a small kind of community of people. So yeah, that's what I kind of did pre-COVID. Which was good. I really enjoyed it, and I think the more conferences that you are able to go to, and there are a lot of free conferences as well, or students can often go for free to some conferences, you will build up a lot more confidence, a lot more self-esteem as well. And it's just really good to see what the topics have been discussed in the sports law sector that year. But that was kind of things pre-COVID. Post-COVID, obviously, I think everything moved to a digital platform, so the element of anxiety or whatnot completely disappeared, because not completely, but you weren't having to meet people or go to events, because it was online. And a lot of these webinars, you didn't have to you join in with a video, or because there was hundreds of people there, so it was just very much a webinar that you watched. But in that regard as well, I found a lot of useful sign up to these things through LinkedIn or Twitter or the Law and Sport website as well. They often shared webinars to attend as well. So yeah, there's plenty of things to do, but it can seem really overwhelming, especially when you don't know where to start. But the very first thing I would do would probably go on the Law and Sport website, or just check out people's LinkedIn profiles and see if they're sharing any webinars or conferences or links that you can join, and then take it from there. And then if you are, as we go into the kind of post-COVID, if you like, way. I would definitely, top 3 tips for conferences, I would say definitely read the agenda before you go, reach out to people before you go, and 3, probably finally, just enjoy yourself, because you'll get a lot more out of it if you kind of just relax. So yeah, that's my 2 pence worth, I
Yeah,
think.
a couple of actually questions that have come up as a result from
Okay.
Ella and from Erin, and actually from Lloyd we'll talk about. So please keep the questions coming, because we're right in the
Yeah,
midst.
Dan, I can't see those questions, so feel free just to.
Sorry. So yeah, I will. I'll read them out
Okay.
as they come through. But from Erin, the question was, what questions did you learn to ask when networking? So I'll just start off on that to a degree, because it sort of feeds into one of the points that I'll talk through just briefly, and then you can obviously just give that a bit of thought in advance of just some sort of practical tips. But taking to Erin's question first, what questions did you learn to ask when networking? The truth is what you want to try and do when you're at least trying to go up and speak to people formally, informally, around the teas and coffees area when you're sitting down or otherwise, is, if possible, to ask very open-ended questions. And when I mean open-ended questions, what I'm talking about there really is just very, very basic, which is, hi, I'm such and such. How are you enjoying the conference? What type of stuff do you do? What are you looking forward to today? What type of things do you get involved in? Have you met other people in today? As a very, very, very basic starter for 5, depending on the scenario, depending on the context, because then what you can also do, and it's something that I read about a little bit ago, which was by a doctor called Christian Bush, who's written a really good book called Serendipity Mindset. But what he actually wrote about in, I think it was a Harvard Business Review piece, was to do with setting hooks. And what he meant about, I think, when he talked about setting hooks, was that what when then hopefully will happen at some point after you've asked a question or two, is they will say, the person will usually reciprocate and say, tell me what you do. And instead of saying, well, I'm a student, and those types of very closed-ended questions potentially close off conversation areas. And so instead of me saying, for example, well, I'm a lawyer, the type of thing that I've learned to try and do a little bit better, which is I will say, I'm a sports lawyer that loves reading, watching sci-fi, and exercising. And by doing that, you provide quite an open-ended statement that people can then sometimes hook something onto, which might be of interest, which might be someone saying, oh, I hate sci-fi. And then you can say, well, hold on, have you watched Star Trek because it's amazing and this happened? Or they might say, oh, you love books. Tell me what you're reading at the moment. Or they may say, oh, you're a sports lawyer. I've always wanted to get into fashion law. Can we talk about that? Or it might be, oh, you exercise. Oh, I did a triathlon a few months ago and it was fantastic. So what I mean there is that what's really important, and it's something I've actually only learned relatively recently, is once you've broken the ice and asked a very open-ended question, try and then when the reciprocation comes, not to close off the conversation in one very narrow way. Actually do the reverse of create opportunities and talking points for people to be able to then ask questions of you. But again, Jodie, maybe without obviously stealing your thunder, whether you had any other particular sort of points there as well.
No, I think that's a really good point, because actually I think when I was networking, I thought that every question I asked had to be about sports law or about the topic that you were attending, i.e. I didn't think that, and I don't think when I first started that I actually ever would say, hi, I'm Jodie, I have X, Y, and Z. I think I just went in with, I'm a lawyer with an interest in sports law, full stop, kind of thing, and that's why I'm at this conference. Whereas actually, there's so much more to you than just student, whatever, graduate, lawyer. So actually to add those extra wings of your hobby to interest as well, I think is great, because ultimately if they ask you a question about it, you've got a lot to say because you're interested in these things. So actually you're doing yourself a favour and giving yourself an advantage by asking and giving information that you're happy to speak about because they interest you. But I think, yeah, you're right. I always thought you had to lead with sports law related questions, especially if you were in a room and you would see, you know, a CEO of a company or a partner of a company, and you thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to make myself sound so intelligent, or I need to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And actually that in itself put additional pressure on you to feel like you couldn't say anything other than sounding like you knew what you were speaking about. And ultimately at these events, not everyone knows what they're speaking about. That's why you're there. You're there to learn. You're there to see what, you know, interests you, whether it's anti-doping, whether it's, you know, corruption, whether it's football law, whether it's conduct. There's so many different sectors and so many different opportunities to learn. You're not supposed to know anything. So I think that's a really good point that you do highlight, that you actually can just simply ask questions about hobbies, interests, passions, as well as noting that you do have an interest in sports law, and just see where the conversation flows. But also conversations don't need to last half an hour or whatever.
Exactly.
They can be 5-10 minutes, and a 5-minute conversation can be just as productive as an hour conversation or a half-hour conversation. Like that's what this whole point of these networking events are. You don't have to be, you know, in a circle with the same person for half an hour. You can dip in and out, and I think that's, and you can then recycle your conversation that you've had with one person with another, because they're ultimately, well, actually they definitely will have a different response, or they'll have something else to say. So yeah, you can just have a block kind of opening so that you can, I guess, rehearse or say over in your head a few times so you know what you're saying, and then just use that across the board when you're speaking to different people.
Yeah, Jodie, I think it's a really good point, which is don't think you need to be one-dimensional, that if you're at a conference or if you're speaking to someone in a professional setting, that it could only be professional discussions that you can have.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, I think what's really important, and it's actually in a number of books that I've read and my experiences as well, including that one of the books, Jodie, that I recommended a while back, which was Surrounded by Idiots. That book by, I'm trying to remember, Thomas Erickson wrote it, and it talks about different personality types. And I think one of the really important elements there is sometimes early on, when you don't really know the personality of the person, you've got to be quite generic. But as soon as you start building relationships with people, then you iterate and can understand what they like more, understand their passion points and interests, and then build the relationship that way. And that was one of the questions from Ella that's come in as well, that we'll talk about in a second as well, which is, Ella has written, could you please cover different ways to keep a network relationship going after that initial first phone call or meeting? And it's again a really good one, and I'm sure Jodie, you'll have a lot of some thoughts on that as well, even based on our relationship in truth over the last few years. But if I just give one or two examples there, and it follows on from just the end of what Jodie and I were talking about now, which is the more that you get to know somebody, the more that you can develop a deeper sense of their personality, of their interests, of what they are happy to share. And ultimately, it goes back to one of the things in the previous DG community that we talked about, which is what you can offer to them, not necessarily what they can offer to you. So, for example, it might well be that early on, you're specifically asking generic and general questions because ultimately you're trying to put together and piece together a bit of a puzzle. But in due course, what actually happens, I think, to a degree, is that, you know, for example, okay, they've got a husband and they've got 2 kids, and this person is just about to go on holiday. They love playing chess. They love reading self-development books. They live just outside London. She's got a job in a particular industry which is interesting and connected to other things. So what you've actually got to do, Ella, I think, to a degree, from your question, is you have to purposely start building an individual picture of each relationship that you start developing, so that in time you can always you always have this perspective, which is, I'm thinking of them. It might well be that then, what you do, you build up a picture of, oh, I know they're interested. Just as you say, Jodie, let's say that they really love the fashion industry and are into a particular studio or fashion designer or otherwise. When you read a piece about the fashion industry, you might send it to them on WhatsApp or send an article on email to say, was just thinking of you today based on our conversation. I read this and thought it might be of interest to you. Because what that says is that I'm thinking of you. I was listening hard to our conversation. I understood what you were interested in, and I thought this might be of value. Ultimately, what it means is you're thinking of them. And what you then have the task to be able to do is you don't have to only build relationships through meeting people constantly. You build relationships in lots of different ways, through thinking of helping, through meeting up, through sending stuff through, from connecting people together, and a variety of different tasks. So I think what you want to try and do as you start building relationships is develop this 3D, three-dimensional perspective of the person, thinking about them. And one of the points I'll talk about after Jodie gives some insights as well is being able to listen better. And I think listening is a very, very, very underrated skill in networking and relationship building.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Dan, with everything that you've said. And I think from the outset as well that all the networking connections that you may build up is well, not unlikely, but you may not remain in contact with every single person that you network with, and that's also okay. Like, you don't need to, remain in touch with everyone. If you do, great, but if you don't, that's just a natural way of how things progress. But I think from Ella's question, I remember, I think even from you, Dan, I think when I originally emailed Dan or whoever, and you had that first phone call, and then naturally at the end of the phone call, Dan or whoever you're speaking to will often end by saying, let me know how you get on, let me know how this application has gone, or let me know X, Y, and Z. So actually, maybe in a couple of months or something after that, you could always just drop them an email and say, further to our conversation in X a few months ago, I'm just sending a bit of an update. Whether that be if something's changed, whether what route you've changed, or what route you've gone down with job or uni or whatever, and just give them a general update, and maybe see if they're free for 15 minutes for a quick call, or even just to touch base, like simply touching base and simply getting an email to say, as Dan said, like, I'm sending an update, i.e. I'm thinking of you and I want to send you an update about what I'm doing. That's also a good stepping stone to do that as well. And it's likely, because you've had the initial contact with them, they're more than likely to respond, in my own experience, especially if you've reached out and, had coffee with them or spoken to them before. And even if you're, I guess if you're connected and you're based in London or wherever you are in the world, even see maybe once every couple of months, if you can meet up for a coffee, 15, 20 minutes out of someone's day, it's just something like that, just to touch base. But it also doesn't have to be all about work, as Dan says. Like, you can ask about their, if they want to, and if they divulge information about their family, about their hobbies, about what they're doing. So you can build up networks that way. But it is really daunting, and it's exhausting at the start. I mean, you can't underplay how tiring it is to network, and I'm not going to underplay it, because I did it for so long, and I still do it now. But it's so tiring to do, sending emails, following up, not necessarily cold emailing, but just searching people that you want to connect with, and then connecting with them, and formatting a message that why you want to connect with them and whatnot. So it takes time, it takes effort, but I promise that it's always worth it. No matter how little you think it's not working or no one's replying, someone will, and then that someone, will open other doors. I mean, Dan, for example, has led me on to meet many other people that I would never have met had it not been for Dan. And that's just through conversations. If I've said I've liked something or enjoyed something, and Dan said, oh, actually, I know someone who blah 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 blah, and then they just connect, and that's, so you never know who or what you may speak to, how relationships or networking may develop. But yeah, it's stick with it, and always do it as well, no matter where you are in kind of any walk of life, or where you are, sorry, in your career. I mean, Dan still does it now, and he's many years into his career as well. And I think I don't think you ever stop networking. I think every day or every conference, every wherever you go, you always meet somebody. So it's good to have these kind of tools and techniques to use whenever.
No, I think that's right, Jodie. And Yes. So before, I think that all of that is totally right. So before we get on to some more questions, we've got a question from Caleb and from Maxwell. Jodie, I think they're actually for you because you've got a lot of experience on these questions. I'll talk about them in a second.
Well, I hope I do.
Yeah, you do, which is good. Please, for anyone that's watching that wants to ask any particular questions, we're here to answer them. We've got a little bit more time still to be able to talk through. We're also going to talk networking, but also in terms of, you know, building and maintaining relationships, building and maintaining status in the industry. We're going to briefly touch on. But the thing that I just wanted to touch on just for maybe a couple of minutes is that, you know, you mentioned, or we both mentioned, about listening when it comes to networking. And I think it's a very understated and sometimes misunderstood concept in a way, because I think when you're able to show a sincere interest in what someone is telling you, what it actually does is enables you to understand the person and the company and their strategy and their connections in a lot more detail. And as much as I think it's very easy for everyone to say to themselves and to others, oh, I'm a really good listener, it's actually very, very hard, I think, to do in practice. Because I think one of the things that I've learned the hard way to a degree is that many people's question habits during conversations, I think, revolve around either thinking about the next question rather than intently listening. Maybe, and that's because you want to avoid embarrassing silences, or there's a fear of the conversation that you're having, you know, and or the meeting prematurely ending. But I think then that worry of sustaining the conversation means that you're not sometimes actively taking advantage of what is being said. So that sometimes then what happens is that what many of us do, and I'm guilty of it at the best of times and have been in the past, is you fill the conversation with your own voice, usually sometimes to impress, out of insecurity, whatever else it might be, rather than listening to the other person, especially when you're meeting someone new. So that actually, ironically, you know, as a result, you're actually asking a question, or the asking of a question can really be of limited value because you're not taking full notice of what the actual response might be. And as a result, you can be actually missing out on valuable information. So I think then the outcome necessarily is that as soon as you become a more dynamic listener, and then when you finish a conversation with someone, regardless of it's a formal meeting setting, in the street, or at a conference, sometimes the thing that I do is I try and actually write, if it's on a card that someone's done, I try and recap, even if it's in a few words, keywords, what I actually talked to that person about. And that can actually be very useful when you're then trying to weave that first or subsequent conversation into that relationship building strategy. And in the past, what that means is that if you're listening better, you're able to pull together a few more fragments or pieces of that jigsaw puzzle for that person and that relationship, which I think ultimately helps in the short to medium to long term, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jodie, were you going to add
No, I was
anything?
going to say, I totally agree with what you're saying. And usually, actually, after as well, when I've networked with people in the past, I've often, you know, if we met for coffee or a phone call, I've often sent them an email or a text afterwards saying, "Oh, thanks very much for your time." Just a quick thing, and then you know, you follow up then a couple of months later. But it's good to keep the connection and communication open. Yeah.
So Jodie, one more question for you, not to put you on the spot, but it's from Caleb. I wouldn't put you on the spot necessarily anyway, so don't worry. He asked a really perceptive question, which was, do most sports lawyers start off honing skills in one particular area of the law out of school, law school, and then try to apply that speciality to a sports related role? I thought you would be pretty adept at answering that question. And we're getting a few more through from Maxwell, from Andrew, from Nathan, and others, which we'll come to shortly. But
Okay.
I think you'd be best placed on that
because
one.
I went from one to the other completely, from one area to the other. So no, my background is from I qualified in civil litigation, so actually nothing to do with sports law at all, which is, you know, commercial contracts, everything like that. So no, I didn't have any particular skills. Well, practical skills probably not. Transferable skills definitely, because you learn that at any in your, you know, law school or training contract or wherever. But no, I qualified as a newly qualified lawyer in civil litigation, so it was personal injury that I did, which is a stark contrast to sports law. And at that point, I then decided that I wanted to move into the area, just because I thought at the time I wanted to do it. But that's not to say that 5 or 6 years or 10 years lawyers, for example, let's say in the PI route, will then cross over and do something. So it's not the be all and end all if you definitely go down one route for a certain number of years and then go to transfer. It's definitely possible. If anyone tells you it's not possible, they're lying, because it definitely is possible. It might be difficult, it might be hard, but as I always say, nothing in life is easy, and if you're committed and you want to, you will do it. So as I kind of explained to people who are not in the legal sector, the kind of jump that I was trying to do was basically, if we were saying that I was a doctor and I'd into the area of, say, cardiology, for example, and I wanted to jump ships to, say, neurology. So it's the same field, i.e. medicine, but it's just a different sector. So there's a different skill set for the different fields that you do. So the skill set that I had in civil litigation, whilst it was useful in terms of transferable skills of drafting, speaking to clients, and, you know, engaging with external counsel, you know, going to court, advocacy, things like that. I mean, I certainly learned an awful lot in that regard that I could now apply in my role, in the current role that I do in a sporting organisation in the legal team. I didn't at the time when I qualified have the skills that sorry, I had the transferable skills, but not the actual you know, knowledge-based skills that you needed to work in sports law. But that's when I then used my spare time to read a lot of articles. I started a blog of things that interested me. I then networked quite a lot. I listened to what people said to me, you know, with advice. Like, for example, Dan gave me quite a lot of advice at the start of my career when I was at uni about things that I should be doing and could be doing. And, you know, if you apply them, and over, this isn't a, you know, it's not a short fix. It's not going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. You know, it's taken me a few years after I qualified, but it can happen for some people really quickly, or others like me, it can take a while. But I think if you've got the drive and the determination and the commitment and resilience to do these things, then I don't see why you particularly would need one specific skill set that can't be then applied elsewhere. I know a lot of training contracts, you get 4 6 month seats into different seats, so you get different experiences, you know, in corporate, maybe property, civil litigation or whatnot. I did a 24-month seat in the exact same seat, so it was I had, you know, advantages and disadvantages because I obviously got to see cases from start to fruition, which a lot of people don't necessarily get to see, especially people who've got a 6 month rotation. So there's definitely pros and cons to both, but no, I definitely wouldn't say that you had to particularly you know, hone one particular area, applying that to a sports related role. And I definitely wouldn't let that hold you back, Caleb, if you're wanting to apply for roles and whatnot.
And I think that, just completely agree with all of that, Jodie, and I think it's really great advice. I think the other thing also is, you know, and Jodie and I were talking about this at length when you were applying for different sports roles at different times, or thinking about your competencies. And, you know, the truth is that there are a number of general legal areas, for example, that are more likely to hit a lot of sports law sweet spots, if that's commercial contracts or regulations or dispute resolution or intellectual property, or corporate and commercial areas. So there are tons of focal points for would-be lawyers to want to get involved in. So I'm just going to jump ahead very briefly, because that's on the same sort of par as there's another question that Nathan has asked. I'm just getting used to this chat function, which hopefully, Jodie, you can see as well. Which,
yeah, I can see it now. Thanks.
Nathan asked, long term, I want to make an area of expertise in football transfers. How would you go about networking with clubs and agents? Because presumably this is where your instructions are from. I think, Nathan, there's probably a step before that. I mean, an area of expertise in as something as narrow as football transfers is difficult in truth, because as I've sort of preached for a while, not only did it take me a while just to become a sports and football lawyer, is that what you are suggesting is just a football lawyer involved in football transfers, which can be is even narrower than that. So the first thing I would say, short to medium to long term, think about the areas that actually then cover football transfers, which is employment, which is commercial contracts, which is intellectual property, which can be regulations, arbitration, and dispute. So in the short to medium term, I would think about those type of areas for building specific skill set expertise. The second thing I would say, in terms of how do you go about networking with clubs and agents, honestly, because you mentioned in another message, actually, Nathan, that you're just about to start your training contract as a lawyer. What I would say is you've got to play the long game. And that's something that I know Jodie does very well with her networks, the networks that Jodie's creating, the long-term relationships that you're building more generally. Because in a way, there is very little point, Nathan, you trying to approach the chief executive of a football club or agency and say, please, can I do some work for you, in truth? The reason I say that is that what's very then important to be able to do is probably two things. Number one, Nathan, is probably in your law firm that you're starting your work with, find the people that are doing work in similar areas that you're interested in getting involved in, and then volunteering and trying to internally network to find those particular topics that you might be able to start gaining experience with. And then, in addition, being able to have at some point connections with clients or contacts of more senior lawyers. The second thing I would say at the same time, which is something that's really underrated, and it's something that actually I did by accident to a degree, is what's really important from a status perspective is what you ideally have to find is people on the whole of the same or similar status levels as you in whichever business, in whichever network that you're thinking about. So again, there's no point trying to approach the chief executive or a senior agent of a particular football or sports agency. What you should be doing, actually conversely, is finding the very, very junior agents or interns or people that are at those agencies or particular businesses that are at a same or similar level to you, and start building those relationships at a junior level. Because what happens then is that you grow with those people. You're not then, in a way, looking short term of saying, oh, I need to get some work from you. I want to work in the same business. Give me legal work to do because I'm really good at my job. Because ultimately, when you're starting out, you can't be good at your job because you haven't had that experience. But what you can do is develop mutually beneficial relationships with people at the same or similar status levels of you. And like all of the things we previously talked about, build the relationship, understand what they're interested in, understand industry trends, start thinking about the stuff that you can do, that you can help with for them, etc. And by doing that, I'm sorry, I've sort of gone off on a slight tangent to the question, but what actually then happens is that you build longer term relationships that last a hell of a lot longer, as long as you invest in them, because you're not thinking about how am I going to do work in the short term. You're thinking, how do I build relationships, which in the medium to long term leads to opportunities and relationship opportunities at that. But I'm not sure, Jodie, when you had any other thoughts on that too.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think from a networking point of view, that everyone thinks obviously has to be a professional point of view, but actually talking of that, if you play like sports and stuff like that, or you have an interest in, you know, whatever football. For me, it was I used to be a curler, which is a Scottish sport in, well, yeah, in Scotland. You probably won't know what it is, but it's, well, you will, but it's basically like chess on ice in a way. But anyway, I wanted to know what the kind of legal things were, who, what was British curling like, what was Scottish curling like. So I reached out to, I think it was the local developing officer in my area, who then put me in touch with somebody else, and I got like a phone call and just like a general thing. So if you've got, no interests in different areas, like reach out to what you're doing anyway, find out who the governing bodies are, find out if you can maybe do some pro bono work for them, see if you can help out with their meetings, like just do anything. I mean, I remember volunteering at a athletics event. I think it was a British athletics or a European athletics event. And I just happened to get chatting to one of the volunteers, and she asked what my interests and things were. I'd mentioned I was interested in sports law, amongst other things. And then she was like, "Oh, I know the lawyer up in anti-doping upstairs. Do you want to come and have a chat with him?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be fantastic." So before like the end of my shift or the end of my duration of the week when I was volunteering, I got to go up to the anti-doping room, wherever it was, and had a nice long chat with, with the guy who was up there. And then after that, we kind of connected on LinkedIn, and every now and again we'll drop each other a message, just seeing how we're getting on. But that was basically literally off the back of a hobby that I really like, athletics. So I went along to volunteer at that, and it was a general conversation that I'd had with another volunteer, which then led me to upstairs to meet. So you never know where any of these connections were going to come at all. And yeah, it doesn't matter if it's on a professional level at a conference or a meeting. It could be anything. But I would always encourage anyone, if they've got interest in particular sporting areas, whatever sport you play, whether it's football, tennis, athletics, anything, try and find out, go to the next person above you and find out what they do in the legal sphere, like who, write their contracts, if they got just anything. And then you never know where that might lead to, is what I would suggest as well.
Jodie, it's a great one. And I think actually it's something we should think about for one of our next discussions, which is how creating opportunities lead to opportunities.
100%.
And I love that idea, because the thing is, nothing is static. It's not like, oh, I do one thing and it ends there. It's like every little thing you do in parallel leads to lots of different opportunity outlets. And that's the thing that I think people have to look out for constantly, which is the more that you do and the more that you put yourself out there for, the more opportunities and things lead as a result. And yeah, I think that's definitely something we should have a think about for a future talk, if that's okay as well. We've got Lloyd, and we've got a few more questions coming, so please keep them coming. I'm not sure about you, Jodie, but I'm actually liking this format, because we can actually see some questions online. And
yeah, no, I definitely am. I think it's I think it's really good. But obviously keen to hear what anyone else thinks who have been on the Zoom calls and stuff before. Let us know. We know what one works better or not. Feel free just to let us know. But yeah, I'm liking this format. I know we said we would, but I know there's a question from Sophie that I know we're definitely going to get to, because I said that we would. I can see that she just put the question in the chat. But Sophie, I promise we'll get to it.
Almost there, I promise, Sophie. The first one, just very briefly, was from Lloyd, which I think we've covered a little bit, which is, what's the most effective way to search for university placements in sports law, in the sports law industry? There's probably two things just briefly to touch on, because obviously it's important for us to get to all the questions as we can. I think I would say the first thing is, don't worry about sports law at university. Worry about getting the core topics of an undergraduate law degree, if that's what you're interested in doing in law. And then lots of sports law topics catch on lots of different areas, if it's equity and trust, if it's corporate, if it's commercial, if it's intellectual property, if it's EU law. There's a vast array that touch on the sports law sphere. So the first thing is, whether you're going to do an undergraduate law degree or whether you're going to do a conversion, whatever it's now called or soon to be called, into a law degree. So I think the important thing there, Lloyd, in all true fairness, is don't worry about sports law. Find the sports law things once you're doing particular modules in an undergraduate degree or a conversion into law, and then find those interesting areas that you want to know more about. But I think that's probably the thing I would say there. And I'm not sure, Jodie, if you want to answer the first idea on Sophie's point. So I'm not sure if Sophie's put it in the overall chat. I can't see it, but she's put it in our private chat, which is if we could touch on the following, which is, how do you sustain a successful career for those like me, i.e. Sophie, and have been fortunate enough to get a foot in the door, but would like to keep striving to do well and not become complacent? How is that done? So I think the question is, Jodie, if you want to have the first go, or I'm more than happy to as well, which is, how do you retain a desire or a drive to keep on excelling or keep on developing once you've achieved one target and then you want to keep going?
Well, I know you'll definitely have about 25 years more experience to talk about this than I will, but from my short kind of period in sports law, as it is now, I think to not become complacent. I mean, I'm working in one particular area of sport. It's not across different sports. So I very much still keep an eye out of what's happening in different sports and areas. Like, I still watch obviously a lot of sport as well, and I just keep my networking up. Admittedly, it's not as busy in terms of the networking that I used to do, because now I've got a job, so my direction and my focus of my day has changed. But I think again that just highlights how like things progress in life. Like, I'll focus on one thing for so long, and when you reach that goal, your like things change. But yeah, I think to get to keep striving to do well. I think, I mean, I'm only maybe 4 or 5 months or so, 6 months into the role that I'm in just now, and I'm very much still learning, actually, the role that I'm in. And Sophie, I don't know how long that you've been in necessarily in the role that you're in, probably a lot longer than 6 months. But I would probably, from my own, or what I'm doing just now, I'm still very much showing enthusiasm. And my work said to me, they were like, everything we do, you come across as so enthusiastic, like you're just bouncing off the walls at some of these things that we want to do. And I think they have said to me that it reminds them that they're so lucky to be working in this industry, because it's so hard to get your foot in the door, that once my foot is in the door, I'm really quite determined to not, step out the door and have that door closed in my face, in a way. So I think in that way, yeah, I'm still very much learning. I still open to a lot of different opportunities. I always put myself forward for doing different things, whether I can do or whether I'm able to do certain legal things or not. I still very, very much want to be involved, whether that's shadowing, like legal counsel or senior legal counsel or whatnot. And I always want to be very much involved, whether it be proofreading things or drafting things, just to kind of keep my foot in the door, to see what's developing, to see what's going on. And then I also just keep my kind of eyes open to what's going on in the external kind of sports law world. Like, I'll read various blogs, I'll network with people, just see what's going on. And like yourself, Sophie, we've had a conversation, so I often just try and do that as well, to see what other people are talking about, see what other and hopefully going forward we'll be able to like meet at various events and just have proper discussions about this. But yeah, I think Dan is probably definitely better placed to answer this direct question, because he has definitely had this with Sophie. So you're saying, I guess my question is for more 5-7 years down the line rather than the immediate future. So Dan, I'm definitely going to pass this over to you, because you definitely have way more experience and years of this. But yeah, Sophie, I hope that was helpful, just that kind of immediate insight.
Thanks. No, thanks, Jodie. And Sophie, it's a great question, because the truth is, and maybe it's certainly a mindset thing. I constantly don't feel like I've made it, is the truth. And I think that's in part an insecurity. In truth, it's almost like, well, yes, you've now do some sports work as maybe a decade ago, but I want to be a real sports lawyer, to now being at Sheridan's and really doing a lot of football and a few other types of sporting roles, and then thinking, well, I'm brilliant, I'm a sports lawyer now. But then what actually happens is, the one thing I would say being a sports lawyer is you still have to be across an awful lot of technical areas and particular topics, in truth. So the complacency point, to a degree, short term or 5 to 7 or 10 years down the line, is actually thinking, what are the areas that I need to be an expert in. And this is where I think things started developing from my side, which was I was constantly thinking, oh, I don't know about that particular thing, or I haven't read those regulations for a while, or I need to listen to that podcast because they're talking about that particular section of the Arbitration Act, which might be coming useful for something that I'm doing in the near future. So the actual point is actually a little bit of insecurity and motivation to keep developing to be the best lawyer I can possibly be, developing in the areas that I am most interested in learning more about, that in turn can be of value to my clients and contacts. So from a pure knowledge perspective, I'm constantly thinking, oh, I need to read that chapter in the latest Sport and Law and Practice on IP or image rights, or the GBE, or intellectual property, or the latest case that's happened literally a few days ago with Manchester City in the Premier League on confidentiality in arbitration proceedings, or the CAT hearing that's happening on the Newcastle takeover, for example. There is always tons of stuff that's on my desk as like a pile of reading that I'm always behind on, but ultimately is what keeps me going, which is I need to read that, I need to read that, I need to speak to this person about this, I need to find out the answer to this particular thing, I need to ask someone to do some research for me on this. And that's not necessarily also thinking about obviously all of the networking thing, but at least that career and knowledge development point is something where I'm just constantly thinking I'm behind, and I need to read, and I need to think about lots of different things. Whilst I'm thinking about that, and hopefully there's a couple of questions coming, because actually the hour has flown by, Jodie, and we've only got 5 or 6 more minutes still to come.
Yep.
But it doesn't take an hour of our chats before either one of ourselves or someone else recommends a good book. This week it is Andrew. So Andrew, thank you for that recommendation. Yes, Never Split the Difference, I think, is one of the best negotiation books I've ever read by Chris Voss. So I would heavily recommend that as the basis for some reading. It's quite detailed, and is sometimes a little bit counterintuitive on certain things, but yeah, I really enjoyed that. So thank you. And we've got another one in the chat from Sophie, which is Mindset by Carol Dweck. I think I don't want to over egg this, but actually I think Mindset is probably in my top 3 favorite books of all time. It's absolutely fantastic. And
Her TED Talk is in one of my top 5 TED Talks of all time. Hers and Brené Brown. I listened to a few of those. They're absolutely fantastic. And I think as well, it can be really overwhelming to, we're putting out all these recommendations about things you should be doing, podcasts you should be listening to, and you must be thinking, oh my goodness, I don't have any time in my day to listen to 10 minutes of one, let alone read 30 articles or 40 articles in a week or whatever. But just take it a step at a time. Literally just do it one at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself, and don't put a target on your back so that you've got to do this by a certain point or a certain date. If you get a book that you want to read, whether it's Never Split the Difference or any other book that Dan and I, or any book that you want to read, just set yourself a target of reading 5 pages a night or whatever, rather than spending, as I always tell Dan, rather than spending 5 minutes on Instagram or TikTok or any sort of media platform, just spend 5 minutes reading the book. And then if it's only 5 pages, that's okay. Like, don't put yourself an unrealistic target of finishing the book, in a day or two. If it takes you a week or 2 weeks to read, that is absolutely okay. Put zero pressure on yourself to do it.
Well, Jodie, there's a good point there. I think it's another point for a discussion, which is routines. Thinking about how you build productive routines. I
know it's really easy in this modern day where everything is online, everything is social media heavily related, and I know it's really difficult to kind of work yourself around these things that are there. But I'm sure it's a different topic we can discuss in the next call, perhaps.
2 quick ones that we can touch on. One is from JH27, which is there going to be an agent summit with Urquhart? The answer is yes. We've just got to work out when that's going to happen, but hopefully we will do that soon. So watch this space. We're coming up to 3 or 4 minutes to go, so we're just going to get to the last couple. If anybody has any burning questions to ask, now is the time to ask them. One has come in from Maxwell. Jodie, it's probably something that you could, if you wanted to, just briefly touch on, which is which core law degree modules would you say go hand in hand with current issues in sports law? Otherwise, I'm happy to take it too.
Yeah, no, off the top of my head, I would probably say intellectual property. I would probably say commercial. What else is there? Potentially employment, because you can see employment contracts and stuff like that. But bearing in mind what you learn as well at uni, and I know that everyone will say this, but you learn, you know, what you're in your modules. It's so different to learning what you learn than applying it in practice. I can't reiterate. I mean, Dan may disagree. I'm not sure, but for me, it was really different to what I learned in uni to how it's actually applied in real life. So some areas that I thought I had an interest in, when I was lucky enough to get a few placements in particular fields, I actually found out that I didn't like the area because it was so contrastingly different to what I thought it was going to be, which is going back to the earlier point. I think it's really important to get different experiences in different areas when you're at university, because the modules don't always reflect what it's like in real life. And I think you won't know that until you get your foot in the door somewhere to find out. But yeah, go back to this question from Maxwell. IP, commercial, employment. I can't think of something else.
I was thinking dispute resolution is probably a big one.
I don't know if you get that at uni though. I'm not too sure that I certainly didn't have that at uni. Some unis do sports law modules.
Civil litigation or anything around those lines. But yeah, and then the one that actually probably was the most interaction with sports was actually EU law. Now, I'm not quite sure how we're going to be studying that in different ways post-Brexit. Different question, but yeah, I'd say EU law specifically too.
But also on that point as well, Maxwell, I would definitely go, especially when you're at uni, pick subjects that you, even if it's not related, just pick something that you actually enjoy, because there's nothing worse than trying to learn a module you absolutely hate and you've just chosen it for the reason that you want to do it because you want to necessarily get into sports law. Like, I sometimes think that's counterproductive. Like, you have to choose a field or a module that you have a genuine interest in, is my own personal view.
Agreed. Time has almost beaten us, but yeah, Ella came up with a really good one, which was successful in daily habits would be a great topic of discussion, as well as so I think we have our next session discussion, Jodie, that maybe we can think about, which would be great.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks, Ella, for your suggestion. I think, and based on that, daily habits, everyone has different daily habits. So whatever Dan or I say, or whoever, whatever we say, it doesn't mean that everyone has to do them. Like, everyone has their own unique daily habits that will work just as well for them. But that's certainly an interesting topic that we can definitely get our teeth into next. And I've got the date of next month's one, which is Thursday the 26th of August. So it's moved from a Wednesday to a Thursday, and it will be at 6 p.m. Rather than 5:30. I think we're going to move to that time of 6. But I'll put out reminders again on the LinkedIn group. Please feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn if you're not part of the DG community, and I'll happily invite you to the group and accept you. And also feel free just to send me a message or connect with me or Dan on LinkedIn or whatnot, and we're both happy to chat to people as well if they want to.
Thank you. So the last thing we would say is, yeah, we might have a guest for our next talk, fingers crossed, which will be fantastic. The second thing I would say is, please just spread the word about the talks that we have, the resources that are on the podcast, the YouTube channel, stuff that we do, sharing inside the DG community. We're trying to really push really hard just to share links, interesting areas, topics, cases, industry focus more generally. So all I would say is thanks very much, everybody, for joining, as always. Hopefully we'll have a great month of a little bit more sunshine. And we really look forward to seeing you at the end of August for the next session. Thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you.